All right. Well, hey, everybody. The time for convening having arrived. We are going to go ahead and get started as folks are still trickling in. I think most of you know me. I'm Nathaniel Darnell, the NFRA director for the Georgia Republican Assembly. I'm also joined by Catherine Bernard, who's our other NFRA director with the Republican Assembly. She's on the line. Got lots of folks from all over the state who are joining us. And if you are not a GRA member, but you're a delegate to the convention, just real briefly wanted to make sure you were familiar with the GRA, the Georgia Republican Assembly. You can learn a lot about us from our website, which is georgiara.com. You'll see that we've been a part of a movement that really started back in the 1930s in California and started to help with a lot of things in politics in California, helped Ronald Reagan get elected as governor and also helped to launch his presidency. The movement has spread across the nation. We've had some great success here in Georgia so far. You can learn a lot about us and what we stand for on our website. You can also learn about our different chapters. We now have 42 different chapters across the state that we're very excited about that have helped to lead the shift that we've seen across the state. And so we are looking forward to some big things happening at the state convention. You can also learn about our endorsements. If you are not familiar with how we endorse by the leadership, the executive committee, by the membership at our endorsement conventions. And you may have heard we had an endorsement convention a few weeks ago where we 2/3 of our membership voted to endorse these candidates here for different party offices. We got Josh McCoon for our chairman, Marcy McCarthy for first vice chair, Grant Frost for second vice, Vicky Consiglio for treasurer, Alton Russell for assistant treasurer, Carolyn Jeffords for secretary, Susie Voiles for assistant secretary, Sally Grubbs for over 80 chair, Christopher Mora. And you can learn more about the candidates and why we endorse them at our website on this page here. You can also learn more about the topic of tonight's discussion at this page, which goes into some depth about the proposed accountability rule, which Alex will be talking about. And it has an FAQ and some descriptions, and it also has a link to the actual submitted rule here. And so that text is available for your review. There's actually two rules that Alex submitted. One is this rule, which is the actual accountability rule, and the companion rule that limits a candidate's ability to sue if they're trying to qualify. So I'm sure Alex will talk more about that and many other subjects. I will launch us off in a word of prayer here in a moment, and then we'll turn it over to Alex to get started with his presentation. After he presents, you'll get a chance to ask him some questions, and we'll have hopefully a constructive dialogue here this evening. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for everybody who's here on the call tonight. We ask that you would bless our conversation, that it would be edifying, that it would be educational for everyone who's going to be going to the convention this weekend as a delegate. Pray that our questions and conversations would be harmonious and would help us to advance truth and justice as your word defines it, and that we would have a better Republican Party and a better state because of how we work together. We ask all of your blessing in these ways, in the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Amen. With that, I'm turn it over to our esteemed GRA President and Attorney Alex Johnson. Alex, you want to unmute yourself? Go right ahead, sir.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Nathaniel, for putting this together. Nathaniel's a great national director for the RA. Catherine Bernard's also awesome. She's the other national director for the RA, and I know she's on the line as well. So I'll start off just by introducing myself. I know not everyone in the call knows me, but this is sort of relevant to the perspective of why we need the accountability rule. So I have been involved in the GOP, I mean, pretty much my whole life. I got involved in the Republican Party itself. The organization back in 2009 was my first convention. I believe it was out in Savannah. And when I grew up, I was taught that Republicanism was about limited government, individual rights, less spending, pro-life, the things that, like, the basic Republican principles that I think everybody on this call likely shares, and that's why you vote Republican. And the Democrats are more about collective action, just spending to get votes and all the things we know now. I mean, they've gotten so much worse. But I got involved in the party around 2009. And I remember being shocked at some of my first party meetings because Republican politicians would show up and we'd have like 50, 60 people at a DeKalb County meeting. And I'd hear a politician who says they're a Republican get up, talk about spending more money or having some sort of fee or tax increase. And then people in the room would applaud that. And I remember being shocked and confused because I'd look around and be like, wait a second, I thought this was a Republican meeting, but at the same time, we are there trying to get Republicans elected. So, I sort of went along with it. And then, 2012, I remember rolled around, and I remember that a lot of people that were Tea Party people and Ron Paul people showed up to the conventions wanting to have their voices heard. And I remember people saying, well, that's not the role of the party. The role of the party is to get Republicans elected. And I was confused by that. I was also confused by some of the sort of the exclusionary tactics that went on at the time trying to keep people out. And then I realized by 2013, when I actually ran for party chairman back then, on pretty much on the platform of accountability, the idea that politicians should be accountable to the voters and to the party and to the principles that we all hold, I realized that there were a lot of people who sort of were dismissive towards the idea of any principles at all. Like if you were in favor of gun rights, that didn't really matter. If you were in favor of more Christian conservatism, that didn't matter. If you were a Tea Party person saying that we needed smaller government, that didn't matter. The message was what we needed was just to get Republicans elected. And there was an effort almost to play the Christian conservative Republicans against limited government Republicans, against Tea Party Republicans. And it was very, very odd to me. But then I eventually figured out, especially as time went on and you get to, 2016, you start seeing seeing President Trump and the efforts to sort of minimize him throughout the media and in the state of Georgia, and playing people against the people who supported Donald Trump and got involved. I came to realize that the main thing that was going on is that there is a media industry and a political industry that doesn't care about principle. They don't care about gun rights. I mean, it's taken over a decade for us to have constitutional carry. They don't care about lowering taxes. They don't care about the actual principles that Republican voters, that the general public care about, and that would be good for the country. What they care about is having us vote Republican while they continue to offer, tax credits or tax breaks to certain industries that are funneling in Democrats to Georgia, and everyone else is footing the bill. And you could see that simply by how long it took for constitutional carry. You could see it by the fact that when conservatives and conservative Republicans get into the legislature, they're oftentimes threatened for not going along with what quote unquote leadership wants. And essentially, the Republican Party is treated as if it should just be cheerleaders, that we should just sit there, cheer for whoever buys the primary, and that's it. I mean, if you think back to the Secretary of State race many years ago, I mean, Josh McCoon, who's currently running for party chairman, who the GRA has endorsed, I remember that he was the best known Republican around the state regarding like being principled, for standing up. I mean, he took flack in the Senate for actually wanting transparency of campaign finance reform and had committees stripped for doing that principled act while in office. But then in the Secretary of State race, I mean, the well-funded people bought the primary, and you see what has happened with the Secretary of State office. And that's where we really need to be thinking about our brand. The GOP, when you think about Coca-Cola, I think is a good example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. If 1% of Pepsi cans had rats in them, no one would buy Pepsi. Now, if 2% of Pepsi cans had rats in them and 1% of Coca-Cola cans had rats in them, people wouldn't be buying Coke, but Coke would still look better than Pepsi. And I think that that's what, I'm sure you've all heard it before, people, not us, I mean, we all vote Republican religiously, but when you talk to other voters, a lot of them are like, well, I don't really like politics, or I don't really like the parties, but I guess I'll vote for the Republican over the Democrat because the Democrat's terrible. I don't really like the Republican though. And that is horrible branding when you think about it. Like what we want, and when using the Coca-Cola analogy, you want a product that everyone wants to buy. We need a standard, a brand with Republicanism where when a Republican's on the ballot, people are excited and happy to be voting for them. And they aren't just thinking, oh, well, you know, it's the worst of two evils. Now, in some states, they're comparatively draconian. I mean, if you look at Virginia, the state convention can select the Republican nominee for office for governor, for example. Like they have their convention just like we do, but there, with a certain vote total, they could pick the nominee. And that's a lot of power going to the convention delegates. The accountability rule, which I've proposed, is a pretty simple one. What it does, it gives the power to state convention delegates to tell the state party and make it an order that the GOP, upon a majority vote of these delegates, will not qualify certain individuals for office as a Republican. Those people can run as Democrats, they can run as independents, they can do whatever else they want. But if the vote passes at the next election, the next time there's qualifying, they just won't be allowed to qualify. The GOP won't qualify them, and they aren't on the Republican primary ballot. If all of you are wanting to run for that office, you're all on the Republican primary ballot. But whoever has been voted by the state convention by a majority to not be, just isn't on the ballot. And the timing of this would be at the state conventions. Now, obviously, state conventions could be moved, and that's beyond the scope of the rule. But as of right now, the way it would work is that qualifying for, state House rep or state Senate happens before the state convention. So what would end up happening is this is something where the politicians, some of your favored politicians maybe, who may be getting pressure from leadership, when they are in session before the state convention, and they are being told you should go along with this big government boondoggle, or we're going to spend our money in campaign coffers to get a primary opponent for you, which has happened to some good state reps in the past. They could say, look, you may be able to threaten me, but I know that the state convention's coming up in 2 months. So, I mean, I'm more afraid of them watching my voting record and not letting me qualify in 2 years than I am of you. So I think that is one of the benefits of the rule. It's a very major one, and it really does give the delegates the most informed, like strongest activists in the state, the ones who are involved in the local communities, who aren't going to be as easily swayed by millions of dollars of advertisements, to actually make the selection. If somebody is not upholding Republican principles, they no longer get to be an albatross dragging down our brand. They don't get to be a rat in the Coke can anymore. And I think that is the point of the rule. I mean, it's a really simple rule, honestly. It's only for the state convention. It's not for a state committee to do anything. It's not for the executive committee. You would have to get a majority vote of the 2,000 convention delegates in order for this to take effect. So it's a pretty high bar to make that happen. And it's a lot of very informed, intelligent individuals that would be making that call. So I guess that's sort of my initial thoughts on it. I've heard some objections in the past, but I'm more just interested in a conversation or questions, and we can see what we all think.
Well, hey, thanks, Alex. As we're waiting for folks to submit their questions, I know one question that I've been encountering is people say, well, what about lawsuits? If we have this rule, are we immediately going to get flooded with lawsuits? And my understanding is that just passing the rule would not give anyone standing to bring a lawsuit. They would first have to try to apply the rule to a particular individual, right? Would you like to explain how we would deal with lawsuits?
Yes, so I am an attorney. I'm licensed here and in Virginia and in DC. I've looked into this ahead of time, and as Nathaniel mentioned, he's right. That is an issue of standing. Like for someone to sue over this, you would actually need to apply it to someone for them to say, well, this was somehow unfair. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Virginia has a system where they select the nominee. Other states have varying systems and regarding selection of nominees. But one thing is that there's a Supreme Court case, a U.S. Supreme Court case, supreme law of the land, interpreting the U.S. Constitution, tied to freedom of association, called, there's a case called California Democratic Party v. Jones. And what that case holds, the theme of the case, the ruling that the Supreme Court said, was essentially that political parties, like any other group, have freedom of association. And the government, that doesn't matter if it's a state government or the federal government, they cannot force a political party to associate with people that party, which, and our party is it's something that people may forget, but we are a private organization. It cannot be forced to associate with people that we don't want to associate with. And the state convention is the supreme governing authority of the Georgia GOP. If the convention is voting and saying we do not want someone, then they are like the government cannot force against it. And I know that there are various people who will disagree. I would ask you to ask yourself, are those people making a career off of politics? Are those people lawyers who make money off of politics? Personally, I actually don't. I do a lot of personal injury litigation. I sue government officials when they violate people's constitutional rights, and I represent businesses. My law partner does a lot of criminal defense work. So we do not make money off of politics and politicians. We are against, we actually stand up for people's rights against those interests. So a lot of lawyers may say that, oh yeah, well, state law says, well, state law doesn't run the Republican Party. State law can't overrule a private organization according to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that is my answer regarding the constitutionality issue and the lawsuit issue. I mean, people may bring lawsuits one day. I mean, I would love to help the GOP pro bono fight somebody who turns around and says, like, you can't do this, because frankly, to me, it seems pretty open and shut based on the case law. I mean, politicians will be mad and they may try suing, but I mean, unless we're doing something bigoted, like throwing somebody out for their race or gender, which violates other laws, I don't think that would be a successful lawsuit.
Right. And I've heard some candidates, like our endorsed state party chair candidate, Josh McCoon, say that we need to do more fundraising for lawfare situations. We've seen a lot of lawfare with the election integrity issue. We need to be able to defend ourselves from attacks from Democrats, but we also need to be able to go on the offensive. And it seems to me that what you're saying would tie into that. Maybe potentially we need to have better fundraising for, suing other people and protecting ourselves from lawsuits than we have up till now. But you feel pretty confident based on the Constitution's text, the original intent of the Constitution, the recent case law, and some people don't realize there's also a freedom of association provision in the state Constitution, which parallels the U.S. Constitution. So it seems to me like you have a lot that would be on your side that would help you win lawsuits of that kind.
Yeah, I think so. And also, just for everyone's information, and this is something that shocked some people the other day that I mentioned at an orientation or in conventions, different states, like they do have different rules on on qualifying and the way the party picks nominees. But one thing that I think everyone might be interested in is that, like in California, politicians out there select state convention delegates. And people who have run for office select them. It's not grassroots the way that Georgia is. So a lot of this, like different state parties are run completely differently than the state of Georgia. So that's something that I just want to throw out there as a bit of information to everyone that Georgia's it's not uniform the way that any of this works. But as the founders originally intended, I mean, different states can be laboratories for invention on some of this. And I think the accountability rule is a good middle ground between allowing people to buy primaries versus the convention selecting this is the only nominee and that's it. I think this allows a lot more involvement, but also lets us, get the rats out of the Coke can, so to speak.
Right. Now, if you guys have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you and let you ask your question verbally. I do see that there's a few people that have posed questions on the chat. James says, can Alex address the concerns I might have that this rule could be wielded by the worst political opponent?
Yes. So that is something where, so first of all, we need to look at the current system to be very, very clear about the worst political opponent. Now, right now, you have who can appear on the presidential ballot in Georgia determined by the state executive committee, less than 30 people. They determine who gets to run as a Republican for president in Georgia. It's not just walking out and signing up. It's not a large group of people. It's just the state EC. So right now, presidential candidates, the way that works, chosen by less than 30 that are party members that are the executive committee. When it comes to all the other races, right now, a lot of donors give a lot of money to a lot of different PACs. You now have leadership committees due to a law passed recently, but you have a lot of money going to PACs, and you have money going to sitting politician incumbents, especially committee heads in the state legislature. And I mean, federal money is in the millions, but they have lots and lots of money sitting there. And if you want to replace one of them, that is, I mean, it is virtually impossible to happen. Incumbents have, I think, according to Ballotpedia, they have over a 99% reelection rate in the state of Georgia. Getting rid of an incumbent is virtually impossible. So to the extent that any of the worst political opponents are incumbents and the people voting for bad things and voting for bigger government or higher taxes or corporate cronyism, that's who's in charge right now, and trying to mount a campaign against them using money. I mean, it will be very difficult. Some of my very good friends who are politics professors who are conservatives, they've even told me once, not being involved, they are not involved in the party, that when I ask them how do they vote in the primary, they say, oh, it's based on the mail I get. Let that sink in. Who's sending the mail? The people with the money, the ones that have a vested interest in it, the people who want to be left alone by government, people like my family who raised me, vote Republican, they're for limited government. They do not have the firepower against that. So in order to weld this against, true Republican principled people, to weld this rule, you would have to somehow get people involved in all the counties around the state, or at least enough to get a majority of the delegates. And then you would have to somehow convince those people that you just, those opponents just newly got involved in the party. You would have to convince them to go to the state convention, meaning all the process all of us have gone through, the cost of that, the time commitments of that, and then to ignore you and everyone like you on this call and that's currently in the party when you tell them, hey, this guy who just hired you to show up to not kick him or her out of office, or to kick out, one of the good guys, that they would have to somehow ignore all of the information that all of us involved in the party collectively have on those candidates' voting records and what's going on. They'd somehow have to stage that operation and have a whole bunch of people show up signing documents saying they're a Republican and then coming in and just ignoring their voting records and history. I mean, I think that would be virtually impossible for them to do, because they would need to get that many people through, and they would have to somehow have people who are mindless drones who will return people to office who are openly betraying the public. And I mean, frankly, I think that our worst political opponents, those moneyed interests, they've already publicly said they don't care about the party, and to some extent they why would they go through this process to exclude somebody when they are already just winning the races by spending the copious amounts of, I sometimes refer to it as a uniparty, but that type of money. They can already beat the good guys using the money, there's no real incentive for them to look bad going through this process, because that would also make them look really bad in a primary election if they, bribed a bunch of people to try to do something in the party.
Good points. Good points. I see James Albali. I see your hand up. I see Christina's hand up. But before I recognize you, we've got a few questions in the chat I need to get caught up on real quick. Jeff asks, wouldn't blocking an endorsement be tantamount to the body stripping an individual member of privilege of membership running for office and therefore require 2/3 vote? We're not talking about endorsements, the GRA endorsement, just to be clear. This does not have anything to do with endorsing a candidate like we do in the GRA. This is about allowing a candidate to qualify on the ballot when you go to the polls for the primary. They wouldn't be able to vote as a Republican. They wouldn't be able to run as a Republican on the primary ballot, and therefore they wouldn't appear on the general ballot as a Republican either, just to be clear. So it's not about the endorsement process. Let's see. Christina says, will this proposed resolution be presented at the convention in Columbus? Yes. James, I'm going to go ahead and recognize you, unmute you. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. This may be a fine proposal. Frankly, I just think it's moving too fast. I don't think people have had time to consider it. It obviously gets to the very heart of what constitutes the Republican Party in Georgia. And there are already issues out there about whether or not the incorporation, proper or not, that was conducted in 2014 of the party has to be undone. I think this is moving fast, and clearly people do not understand it. And remember the law of unintended consequences. We're going to keep out the uniparty folks with this proposal. Well, maybe the uniparty folks will use it to keep out patriots. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Alex, what's your response to that?
Oh yeah, no, and that is a good point. Although the issue that I have, and having seen this for so many years, is that right now the Patriots are in the resurgence. Like, we are currently showing up to the party. We currently have a large majority. One thing that that if you read a really good book that goes back into some of the history of this is A Choice, Not an Echo by Phyllis Schlafly. And it was really illuminating to me, because what it talked about is how throughout the 20th century, the big corporate interests just ran the party. And for the most part, they were not principled. They hated anybody who was principled, and they did a very good job at keeping them out of power or minimizing their power when they were there. So I think that the real response to that is that right now, I think is the time to make it happen in Georgia, because if we wait, they count on people getting involved, being riled up, and then when nothing happens or bad things happen, people go away. There's a reason why there's so few people from the Pat Robertson era, when they had to fight the establishment and broke a gavel to end up going to the national convention and won a lawsuit over it after the establishment cheated. There's so few of them involved anymore. And then you fast forward to like Ron Paul and Tea Party people. There's a reason why a lot of them aren't involved anymore. Like, there are a lot more of them involved than earlier, but the issue is they wait out everyone because they make money off of this. Like, when you look at some of the people that have been in party leadership who are like lobbyists who have given to Democrats, like, they just wait out the rest of us. And it's because, like, if we don't control our brand, I mean, people get fed up being associated with it. So I hear you. It is definitely a concern, but that's why we need the people currently involved to stay involved and to bring in more. And I think this rule change does that. And I do think that their tactic is going to be just waiting us out.
Very good. Jill asked, what happens when the cabal comes in and takes over county control? This is not a county proposal. This is a state proposal, right?
Right. And honestly, right now, and the state rule, if you read the text of it, it specifically says that this rule does not affect the ability of county parties to refuse to qualify candidates. I think that right now a county could, if a county is in control of their own qualifying, the county party that is, I think they could vote currently to refuse to qualify people on the county level. So that is a risk that I think currently exists if they were to do that. I do think, though, that most county cabals have the they already have the money and the power. And secondly, that actually was attempted this year by some of the establishment in, I think, Catoosa County. I don't know if Joanna Hildreth is on. She's the county chair up there. But, the county commissioners were acting like Democrats. They're trying to restrict property rights. And they also didn't like the fact that I think it was Senator Colton Moore got elected, a very good grassroots GRA endorsed conservative Republican. So they tried to organize to take over the county party. And she and some others, including people in the RA, put out messages to all the voters in the county about what the corrupt politicians were doing. And she had even more involvement showing up supporting her, and the county commission group slinked away into the shadows. They didn't even, when they saw the numbers, like they were getting text messages like, yeah, forget it, don't even bother, this will be embarrassing. So ultimately, when good people, like I'm sure most of us on this call, if not all of us, are involved and can organize, like they're outnumbered. The cabal is outnumbered. It's just a matter of we need good people involved doing things. And I think that's part of what this rule does. It's one of the I don't know if it's an unintended consequence, but I think it will help involvement.
Right. The founding father said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, right? So we have to constantly make sure that, we have the majority of those conventions to prevent bad people from doing bad things. Somebody says, Victoria says, can you please run through the exact steps and timeline if I would like to see that a certain candidate will not be able to run for office in 2024 election? For example, Secretary of State wanting to run for governor, or governor wanting to run for U.S. Senate.
So the way it would work on a timeline for anyone is that, so right now, like let's say that the rule was in place right now. Like let's say that this rule had passed a year ago. All right. So the rule was passed in 2022 and we're going to the convention right now. So the timeline, the way it would work is if you knew of a politician who should not be able to qualify as a Republican, and you could fill in your favorite name of a politician who you don't want to be running as a Republican in the future. You think they've betrayed the brand and they should be done. So you would go to a microphone at the state convention. According to the rule, there would be an opportunity to do this. You would go and you would move that person not be allowed to qualify as a Republican. So there would be a debate, there would be a discussion, just like anything else. And if it received a majority vote of the delegates at the convention, that person would be barred from qualifying. So then let's say next year rolls around, that'll be 2024, and the seats up for election next year are a lot of state house seats and state senate seats. I know that if there's other positions out there, but no matter what position it is, the way it works is that people who want to qualify for office go down to the Capitol, meet with Republican representatives, and pay a fee and sign an oath. If this rule is passed, what would happen is they would walk in, they would say, I want to qualify as a Republican. And if they are the person who got voted on at this convention to not be able to qualify, the GOP would say, sorry, we can't qualify you. And if somebody at the GOP tried to qualify them, that would be void. They would be resigning whatever office or employment position they have. The act would be null and void according to the rules, and that person would not be allowed to qualify as a Republican. They could go off and run as an independent. They could walk over to the Democrat table and pay their fee and qualify as a Democrat, but they could not qualify as a Republican. If it's for something that isn't for another 2 years after that, like let's say they want to walk in and qualify for governor in 2026, unless the state convention has voted to rescind that person wouldn't be able to qualify as governor. They would not be able to qualify for any Republican office in the state of Georgia unless the state convention has a vote at a convention to rescind the earlier decision. No one else would have the authority to do that. And that would be the timeline. It just would be that they would no longer get to qualify as a Republican unless we voted to allow it.
Thank you. So yeah, you mentioned Joanna Hildreth, who's the chair of the Catoosa County. I know she's a huge supporter of this proposal. She wanted to be here tonight. She couldn't make it because she just had a new grandbaby, but she is definitely with us in spirit on this subject. We've got another question, a bunch of questions rolling in. sounds like you're saying from Chris, sounds like you're saying it's easier to rig the primary now than it would be to do so under this new proposed rule change. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is a nice pithy way of putting it. I mean, right now they buy the seats. I mean, I used the example earlier of that Secretary of State race where Josh McCoon was, shut out of the runoff, and Raffensperger and Belle Isle were in the runoff by spending copious amounts of money. And I mean, money talks in this a lot of the time, and that is where it is very easy for those interests to be in charge now. When you hear about chambers of commerce and big corporations, I mean, that's why they have so much influence, and then they get their message blasted out through the AJC. All of you, I'm sure, have remembered the various boycotts and the negative press we got from various, corporate entities doing this. I mean, look to Florida. I mean, the governor down there was standing up against it, at least standing up to Disney. But we really gotta look into this and say, look, should we have a seat at the table? Should the GOP, the delegates that spend so much time and treasure and sweat, do we get a seat at the table, or are we just going to be left with whoever bought the primaries? That's the way I see it. And I think that the party, the delegates should have that voice.
Right. You're also saying that they actually do already under the Constitution. It's not like we're changing their constitutional rights by passing this rule. You're just specifying the process in which they can exercise their constitutional right, correct?
Exactly. And they could turn around and run as an independent. I mean, that's the thing. Some of these politicians who have like $2 million coffers, hey, they can run as an independent. I still think they'll lose because people are going to vote for a party, especially if we establish that we are the Mercedes-Benz, or we are the, I'm trying to think of luxury goods. We're the Ritz-Carlton of political parties. Well, the Democrats still have a rat in their Coke, in their Pepsi can. I mean, that's the thing. If we do this, we'll have a lot more people voting Republican. And if people want to run off and start a corporatist party, they could try to, but I don't think the ballot access laws would be very favorable on that.
What I guess I'm saying is, we, the party, already have the power, the right under the Constitution to not qualify a candidate if we don't want to. It's just we haven't delineated how it would be exercised, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's changed in times throughout history, and we have the power to do it, and it's been a long time coming, and I think a lot of people just been keeping it from us, the idea of how to make that happen.
We have a hand raised for Chaplain Daniella. If you'd like to ask your question, I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So basically the way you're explaining it is that when the convention was meeting and all these new delegates were getting up and they were screaming because they were upset about so many things. They didn't even understand parliamentary procedure at the time, some of them, that when they wanted to say that we needed to have a negative resolution against Brad Raffensperger, that he should not run as a Republican, then basically the convention would vote and then he would not have been on the ballot. Is that correct?
Yes. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I almost forgot. I guess was it last year? Yeah, I forget if it was last year or 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. I actually submitted a resolution that would have prohibited the Georgia GOP from qualifying Brad Raffensperger for Secretary of State, like allowing him to be a Republican. I made that I submitted that, and then I had it. I moved to replace a resolution being debated with that one. I read it to the convention body, and the convention chair at the time, Randy Evans, lawyer, who has made a lot of money off politics from his disclosures when he was appointed ambassador to Luxembourg, was like, you can't do that. And he was saying that that's against like case law. And I was like, no, you're wrong. I'm an attorney too. And then pretty much they shut down debate on it. But the point was that resolution was made, and we would have had the power to do it then, I think, too. This rule change codifies that power and makes it very clear, and it also makes it so that the delegates, and only the delegates, get to exercise it. And I think that, it's giving the power to the people.
I agree. And I would have voted for that. And there was a lot of confusion. And I think this is part of the problem with the party, is that there are people that would agree and want to be heard, but they're just the little people in the communities. And so I think this is really important, because if you're going to go to a convention, make it count. And also, if people don't understand parliamentary procedure, they need to learn on the local level. And so I think what you're proposing is good, because the truth is, if they're good, clean candidates, they're not going to have a problem if they really want to run, because they can run as an independent if they want.
Good
So
point.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, your comments. Excellent. Yeah, so one of the common complaints we've heard from people in the party already who've been running the party for the last few years is that they don't really have much leverage over the folks in Atlanta. They can make appeals, they can have private conversations, they can ask them, pretty please, will you please allow us to have election integrity, or whatever the issue might be. But at the end of the day, the party doesn't have a lot of leverage, right? This would give us leverage, is what you're saying, Alex, it sounds like.
It definitely would. I mean, and I don't know how long everyone on here has been involved, but one thing I have heard over the past, 14 years is a lot of people say, and the irony is it's usually a lot of people who make their money off politics or part of the paid political industry are like, why are we wasting so much time with resolutions? It's not like the politicians care anyway. And that's sort of an irony about it, is that, well, they're going to care a lot if they actually have to listen to the delegates and the local parties and all the activists. And if they don't, there's a threat and danger that they might not get to qualify as a Republican. I mean, it is one of those situations where I with the money going to the PACs and everywhere else, it really does seem like the GOP, what the paid political industry wants, is for us to just be some cheerleaders for Republicans, but not actually be able to have our voice heard or represent anything from our local communities. And I think that's very dangerous for the health of the party and for our nation.
And we have to be aware of the fact that on the other side, at the Capitol, these Republican legislators, they're getting pressured to compromise in different ways, right? It's not like people are just being nice to them and just, saying we'd like for you to compromise. They're threatening them. They're saying, if you don't, we're going to take away your committee assignments. We're going to give you the lousy office suite. We're going to put your parking spot by the giant pillar in the farthest, depths of the parking deck, and et cetera, et cetera. So they provide all these disincentives for them to be Republican legislators who stand by the principles. You're saying we need to provide them an incentive on the other side to get them to do what's right, is what I'm hearing. Right?
Yeah, and it's a lot of times it's called, I mean, sometimes I've heard people refer to it as political cover. It's one of those things that if you're a state rep and you're going to tell like people in leadership that I'm not going along with you, I mean, it's very useful for them to be able to say, like, look, I'm not going along with you, because if I do, I'm definitely going to be unable to run for office as a Republican. Like that is probably a bigger threat than anything that some politician or lobbyist could throw at a state rep.
Gotcha. Dan Richardson asks in the chat group, how will this rule impact county parties that rely on qualifying fees to run their grassroots efforts and support Republican candidates? And I guess a corollary to that would be the state party also relies on qualifying fees to a certain extent. What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, so the county issue. So again, reading I specifically worded the rule to make sure that this doesn't affect counties at all. So when it comes down to it, counties right now, if you when you run your own qualifying, they bring in the qualifying fees, a percentage of them go to the county party, and that's very useful. And this does not change that at all. Just like on the state level, it wouldn't change that at all. The only thing that's different on the state level is that anybody who's voted to not be able to qualify just wouldn't be able to qualify. So whichever people do that, if that comes down on anyone, they wouldn't be able to qualify anymore. But on the state level, I mean, that's where you're qualifying all the state house reps, all the state senate reps, and all the statewide office holders. So the qualifying fees for county parties are, I think, limited to county offices, like county commission seats and such. So, and this rule would not affect that at all. So that's the direct answer to the question.
That's great. That's awesome. And I guess that if I mean, if this gets exercised, it's not like it's likely to be exercised where we say, we're going to disqualify everybody who's an incumbent from running next year. It's probably going to be targeted at 1 or 2 individuals at a time, I would imagine. So you're talking about just missing out on 1 or 2 qualifying fees. Whereas if you improve the brand where we don't have so many rhinos, then people might be more willing to donate to the GOP. Well, the biggest objections I hear from people today is, I don't want to give my money to the GOP. I'll give it to specific candidates, but not to the Republican organization, because they'll give it to all the rhinos, right? Well, if you have a process for getting rid of rhinos, they're more likely to maybe give donations to the organization. So good thoughts. All right, we got 2 hands raised. I think RLH, you haven't had a chance to ask your question. I'll unmute you there, or ask you to unmute. RLH, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Getting back to the Raffensperger scenario, I would just like to know what the hypothetical situation would be. Let's say he's banned or he's disqualified at the convention. So he runs as an independent, and he's got all the money behind him that we've just already talked about, the corporate interests. And then you've got a Democrat that's also running, that's got their money behind them. Is it not feasible that it's diluted? And let's say Josh runs then on the Republican ticket. Is it possible, hypothetically, that it's so diluted between McCune and Raffensperger that the Democrats get in?
So that's a great question. Now, and this is just something about state law that luckily is beneficial at this point, and luckily they didn't change it during the last General Assembly. But in Georgia, you need 50% and 1 vote to win. So if you had an actual, like, let's just say theoretically that people vote for the independent candidate, which is very, very rare, but let's say they did that, voted for an independent, you would still end up having a runoff between the top 2. So the worst possible outcome that we would get in that specific theoretical scenario is the same one we have right now. You know, the worst case scenario is we end up with Raffensperger again, because if he already was going to get all that, like he won right now. So in a runoff, even if he managed to beat either the Republican or the Democrat, he would still end up in a runoff against one or the other. So I think we'd end up in the same bad scenario we have now. I don't think that the Democrats would just do extraordinarily well in an independent versus a Democrat scenario with an ex-Republican candidate. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Awesome. Chaplain, I see you have your hand up again.
Yes, sir. So basically, to clarify, what we're saying is it's providing checks and balances for the party. So when there is an issue with someone where it's possibly unethical or a problem, that they can't just come up and represent the Republican Party again. And we're also empowering the people on a grassroots level to have an input, so that when you are a delegate, you're just not doing a resolution that goes into the air, but something that is listened to, because we're looking at the data, the evidence of what is a Republican, and is there a rat in the Coke can or in the Pepsi?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And it really is about brand. I mean, think about how all of you make your decisions every day about when you go to the store or you go on vacation, like what brand you go with. I mean, like, why should the Republican Party not do that, like have a good brand? I mean, I think that there are millions of reasons why it is good for the Republican Party to maintain its brand and to have a good one, so that people have an easy selection rather than this, you know, we gotta select the best of 2 evils. And I mean, I don't think anybody likes doing that. And I think that we have a duty and an obligation to make it easier for the public and to help save our country by having a good brand.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay, we got Angela Bean says, I agree that passing this rule change is needed to help keep the bad players off of primary ballots until we have free and fair elections. This is a must do to have candidates win their races. As Trump says, what do we have to lose? Thank you for your kind comment there, Angela.
Yeah. Oh, and I did want to point out that some comments in the chat, if you're in front of a computer or could bring them up, are pretty good. There's some information on there about how once the convention process like this, like if something like this takes place, there's been no case of the, quote unquote, the establishment taking back over, which I think is a very good point. Thanks to Brant for putting that out there.
Right. Nick Cooper asks, here's a question. Would this rule only apply for state level constitutional offices, or could it be wielded against state reps and senators as well? For example, if this rule were to be invoked against a bad state rep, would that have to happen at the state convention?
Yes, it would have to happen at the state convention. And the reason why it would have to happen at the state convention is because the state party currently qualifies state reps and state senators. So in order to prohibit it, we would need a state rule telling the state party that they, or a resolution to the state convention saying the party cannot qualify a certain person. So it would have to happen to the state convention as well. So it would this would be a relatively high bar to have a vote at the state convention to stop someone from qualifying as a Republican. But I think that's good that it's a high bar. And at the same time, I think that the delegates are the best ones to bring up issues with any elected official.
Mike Crane from Coweta, former state senator, has his hand up. Mike, go right ahead, sir.
There, can you hear me all right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
sir.
Oh, well, I love the idea, obviously. A couple things come to mind. Do y'all recall when Georgia Right to Life was pressing really hard for really true pro-life legislation? Well, and the rhinos in the group, they couldn't stand that. And they didn't like the no exceptions. And so what did they do? Alex, you remember.
Oh,
Nathaniel,
no, they created a new group.
That's right. That's right. And so my concerns with this, there's several, and I texted them over to Nathaniel on a cell number I thought was good. But some of my concerns are, in most organizations or bodies similar to this, if you're going to have a removal process, usually the bar is 2/3, not a simple majority. Or at least that's been my experience of what I've seen. And I think it should, you keep referring to a high bar, but I don't think a simple majority is a high bar. One of the other concerns is, imagine this, let's just say, I liked what you said earlier, the rule was in place. And at this convention, somebody mentioned Nathaniel, I think, mentioned there'd only be 1 or 2 possible folks we would, I guarantee the convention, everyone at that convention would move to have 90% of all seated Republicans not be able to run again as a Republican. I don't disagree with that thought, but can you just imagine that process? There's very few, as each of y'all know, folks that actually fly the banner right. At 10% would be a generous number right now, and we know that. Right. So my question is, there's just no bumpers on this thing as written. In concept, I think it's fantastic. My concern is Kemp and all the rest of them are not going to sit down and take this without a reaction. And they have the capacity, as they've proven, to pass legislation to do whatever they want to do. I mean, another question would be, what gives the Georgia GOP the power to anoint Republicans in Georgia? What makes us a 2-party state? And how might they change those laws to make us irrelevant?
Great points, Mike. Thank you so much for asking those questions. There's several questions in there, so maybe we can break it down and answer each question individually. Alex, the first question I think you had to do with the 2/3 majority versus the majority. And I know when we were talking about this in the early stages about whether to have it be voted on by the state committee, we were talking about maybe 2/3 of the state committee, which is 150 people. But the idea that prevailed was, well, instead of having 2/3 of the 150 people, it would be a higher threshold to make it a simple majority of 1,500 people or 3,000 people, right?
Yeah, and I think that, so when it comes down to the percentage, I mean, you have to think about the difficulty that already exists of getting out information about, bad voting records or things that happen. I mean, because think about constitutional carry, for example. You might think like, oh, this is a new idea that was passed recently because we have, great Republican representation. Representative Gertler was pushing constitutional carry, I think, close to a decade ago. But why did it not go anywhere? Well, the speaker didn't like him and made sure it died and went nowhere. And he was, like, I think recently voted one of the top most conservative reps. Like, I think a research study just came out, or a chart that showed him to be one of the best reps out of the past 15, 20 years. But the point is that they made sure to kill it. But how many people understand the information and can really get it out there that, oh yeah, maybe the vote record doesn't show that they killed this, but these committee heads are killing it. So the effort required to let all the delegates know and to get a majority vote to say that this person can't qualify, especially when these people will be putting out, Facebook ads or anything else saying like, look, I'm a great rep, don't toss me out. I mean, I think that it will be very difficult to disqualify anybody. I think it'll be a high bar to do that because you're fighting a media and a political industry and funding to do it. So I think that if you could manage to get a majority at the state convention is usually about 800 plus people. I mean, if we can get that many people to toss someone, I will be shocked, but I'll also be pleasantly surprised to see it happen. And I also think that a lot of them will act better with this rule in place. I mean, the threat of it, the deterrent effect, I think will help. It's sort of like if, you have signs outside your home showing that you have plenty of firearms inside. I mean, how many people are going to try to break in and rob you when they know that it might be a bad outcome? I think that politicians that are thinking of voting badly are going to start acting better, and we're going to have a much more prosperous state out of it.
Right. Yeah, the fear deterrent is a good point. I think Mike also touched on another concept, which is if we pass this rule and the state legislature doesn't like it, and they attempt to change the law to give themselves the power to control qualifying of candidates, what would we do in that kind of scenario? In my mind, it seems like that we would sue them. And because we have a constitutional right, they can't force us to associate with somebody that we constitutionally don't want to associate with, right? So would the response be a lawsuit, or how do you see that?
So the way that they would have to do it in order for it to be constitutional, I'm sure that if they get to this bridge, they will have to consider it. But if the elected officials don't like it, so the basis right now for why the Republican Party gets to have the primary process and the way it works is that the way it's worded is that it says that the political party getting such and such percentage for, I think it's for governor. Like I looked at the election code a while back about this, but it essentially says that it's either over a 20 or 30% vote allows you to has a primary qualification process. And sometimes it's worded in ways that talk about the party that had the highest number of votes for governor, and then the party that has the second highest number of votes. So that's how the election, the code of Georgia law differentiates like who gets to put people on the ballot. And it's about percentages, and it's about most and second most in the last election. But let's say that they didn't like this rule and they wanted to somehow go around the party. The only way I could think of them doing it constitutionally, because this is tied into what happened in California, I believe, is that if they turned around and said, fine, anybody who wants to qualify for office can do so, but they couldn't make them be able to be Republicans. They couldn't force a Republican system. What they would have to do is adopt a system like California's, where anybody could run associated with anything, and then the top two people move on to the general, which I think would be a pretty dumb move on their part. It'd probably cost them all a lot of seats, and would essentially be, cutting off their own nose to spite their face. That's the only way I think they could do it, because they can't force people to be able to be Republicans. They can't force us to associate with someone that we don't want to associate with. That is what that California Democratic Party v. Jones case said. It's actually in some of the language of a Duke case that I was referred to the other day. That's a Georgia case that pretty much like the courts have consistently said that parties get to associate with who they want, and we are the Republican Party of Georgia, and you can't just redefine that. The law can't do that. It's just, if they want to get around us, they would have to change the entire ballot access laws and qualifying and the whole election system, which I think, you know, if they do that, then that just shows us how bad they are, right? I mean, if they're that afraid of this rule, then that would just show that anybody voting in favor of a change like that is really just like they know they're bad and they have no intention on changing.
Yeah, it seems to me like it would violate this freedom of association provision in the Constitution so fundamentally. That would be tantamount to, like, if the Georgia legislature tried to tell the Southern Baptist Convention that you have to allow drag queens to serve as pastors in your denomination. It's like, oh, well, hold it. Who are you to tell us what we would, you know, have in our convention? That's
exactly. It's like telling the Catholic Church they'd have to you know, have female priests or something. Like, it just doesn't, like, it. You can't do it.
Right. Okay, moving on to Daleen, and then we're going to go to Brant. Brant's had his hand up, but I know Daleen posted this question several minutes ago. She said, please explain how this is fair to the hundreds of thousands of other Republican voters in Georgia who are not active coming to the convention. Wouldn't this prevent them from having a say in who qualifies, who they can vote on?
I mean, that is actually a feature, not a bug. The point is that, one, it will get people to come out to be involved, because that, like, if they really, really care about that and are really informed and they're watching those voting records and they're super excited to vote for Representative John Doe for re-election, like, and then they know about the party, which, you know, does exist, and they will know about, then they'll be involved and come out and make sure to stand up for their representative. And ultimately, I think that if that representative's bad, they're going to show up, immediately meet all of these wonderful people on this call right now who are like, hey, here's the voting record. Oh yeah, you see the voting record, but this is what they're doing as committee head. And I mean, I think that is, it leads to a better outcome. It actually, I think, will be thanked by the voters for actually maintaining a good brand so that they can believe in, that they can tell their friends about and be like, yeah, we actually have a good organization over here. And frankly, what will end up happening from the user experience, I mean, just thinking about it from, like, think about your friends who are not involved in the party at all, and they show up and they religiously vote Republican year after year, just like I did, like before I was involved in the party. And you know, I still do, but outside of the party, most Republican voters are like, oh yeah, I show up and I vote Republican. I vote Republican in the general, and they vote in the primary. However, like, it may be due to mail, it may be due to any number of factors, but from their experience, they're going to show up to a primary on primary election day. They'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 options on the ballot, and they're going to vote for one. The fact that some incumbent who acted badly isn't on the ballot, the primary ballot, I don't think they're going to be sitting there like crying over that. I don't think that's something that they've been like dreaming about for weeks and months, about voting for whoever that person is. I mean, they're going to show up, not see him on the ballot, and then they'll be voting Republican in the general. And if they really have heartburn, they could be involved in the party and try to get that person back as a Republican. But I think that this actually helps the Republican brand. It helps voter involvement. And we're doing a service to the voters by making sure that they are actually voting for Republicans, not somebody who managed to buy a primary and essentially trick everyone by just having an R next to their name while they don't actually believe in anything that they believe in as Republicans.
Good points. Brant, you've been holding your hand up for a while.
Yes. Thank you, Alex. Are there some good resources that people can go to read more about the issues that have been brought up tonight, and as they get closer to the convention? In addition to your rule, is there any place you would recommend that people do some research?
Yes. So I mean, unless you want to be a sort of a nerd and look into the case law, like California Democratic Party v. Jones and some of that, which I think is I mean, that's sort of nuts. You can also go to the Georgia RA website, georgiara.com. I know that Nathaniel, I think, showed a link earlier. I think we could probably put a link in the chat to some of the information and guide sheets on it. I think we'll, if someone came in late, I think we'll probably be putting some of this video on there. And we have a video. I was up in Walker County the other day talking about this, but I would recommend looking at those resources. I mean, to me, it's pretty. It is very, very simple. I mean, this gives power to the state delegates, and it's it's a major thing, but it's a simple rule change. And it really is people who argue about the legality of it. I mean, this is freedom of association. We're an organization. We don't get our brand controlled by the government. That's unconstitutional. And we're there for it. But the georgiara.com website will have something on it. I hope that Nathaniel or someone could just put a link in the chat.
Yes, I
for
just posted that actually. Sorry, when I posted that, I lost my place in the chat as to the next question. Here it is. Jeff says, and he's quoting an email that went out by another group that was kind of poo-pooing on this rule concept. He puts a quote that says, the rule, quote, would allow county and state conventions to refuse to allow candidates to qualify to run as Republicans. This would be disastrous, because the establishment folks would then turn to their rich donors to fund efforts to get their folks out at the Georgia GOP mass meetings. Skimming, but I think this is perhaps the main thrust of the opposition, he says.
Yes, and I think I saw that same email. I mean, I'm what it comes into, I think I addressed this a little bit earlier, but right now, you already have the establishment winning 99% plus, according to Ballotpedia, incumbent reelection rate. So then county parties and the state party, as I mentioned earlier, I think they already have the authority to not allow people to qualify. I mean, I brought up that resolution a couple of years ago against Raffensperger. I think that counties already have the authority, but let's just say that they were to try to do that. I don't think that's going to be very good in a primary election when they end up on the ballot that they bribed people to be involved. And I think that most people aren't, I don't think most people are going to be bribable for a convention process. I mean, we all already understand how this works, that, grassroots people are involved and we are the ones that are in charge. As Brandt, I think, pointed out in the chat, that it's never gone back to the establishment. I mean, right now, the patriots, the good people who are principled Republicans are the ones leading the party and are delegates to these conventions. This isn't going to, I guess, interfere with that in any way. I think that this rule change will actually keep our people involved. History shows that the establishment, they just wait out people like us because of the fact that the party ultimately has been treated as powerless by the establishment. Like they haven't taken a stand and maintained the brand. So a lot of people just go back home.
Well, and two, if we're worried about money, if we're worried about the bad guys using all their big coffers of money to defeat conservatives and get rhinos in, I mean, they're already doing that through the current open primary system, right? With the TV ads that they just drowned out the conservatives a lot of times. But is it harder for them to do it that way than it would be for them to somehow go to all the mass precinct meetings in 159 counties, by the way, because Georgia has more counties than other state other than Texas. So imagine they somehow were able to pay and coordinate people to go to every single mass precinct meeting across the 159 counties and take over at every single one of those, and then at every district. To me, that sounds less plausible than doing what they're already doing. That'd be a lot harder, more expensive endeavor. And we'd have to have a lot of grassroots conservatives that were just, ignorant about letting them get away with that. Because if we outnumber them, then it doesn't matter. We can vote all those rascals to not get seated as delegates to the county, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay. I see a lot of commentary about Debbie Dooley's email. Mike has his hand up. Did you have a follow-up question, Mike, or did we miss one of your questions in our answer?
Oh yeah.
Mike Crane.
Yeah, we may have missed it, Mike, but I also just saw in the chat, just real quick, someone says, yeah, does incumbent have to re-qualify every election? And the answer to that's yes. But Mike, did you have something else, or is your hand just up from earlier?
Yeah, well, no. It's just another thought. And really, thank you, Alex and Nathaniel, for just really putting on a good presentation for folks to talk through and consider. But one of the thoughts that this works in arrears, right? So with the person in my particular last congressional race, we wouldn't have had the foresight to exclude him from the primary, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, unless he had some sort of voting record that.
Well, you may not even know he's running. It's not like people are announced. So in the structure that it currently is, I mean, it's basically a tool to punish folks who have tarnished the Republican brand. I mean, that's essentially what it is. It doesn't stop them from fronting candidates, which the establishment does, and often does in kind of surreptitious mode, where they just kind of sneak in as a wolf, a sheep, and and they, you know what I'm saying. So it's not a fail safe, because they'll just put more candidates up there and then get the money behind them. There's plenty of people willing to toe that line, and it just might mean we don't see them stay in office 30 years, but they're just going to replace themselves with another bureaucrat.
Yeah, and the cynical thing, and I said this sometimes crosses my mind, but I want to be honest with everyone about this, is that, like, cynically, I've realized that these people are going to find ways to buy themselves into office. Like, dishonest, corrupt people are going to be out there. They're going to be able to put a ton of money, like as Mike pointed out. Like, somebody could run, spend a bunch of money, get into office. You don't know they're running ahead of time. The corporate interests are backing them. But the advantage of this rule is that a lot of times, so if these people are going to like stab somebody in the back and they're going to get in there and just betray somebody, if somebody gets into office who is an unethical, terrible representative, but if their choice is either stab their corporate donors in the back and stay in office, or stab us in the back and get voted out at the next convention so they can never qualify as a Republican again, like, I think that might be an opportunity to make some of those like self-interested, terrible politicians act the right way in office. And instead of betraying us, they betray the people who funded them to get them in office, which to me is a comparative win over the current system, where they get in office and then just ignore us and hurt our state and continue growing government and continue, causing there to be more Democrat voters that are therefore leading us down to socialism and communism. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is I would love to see, like, the people who beat the good guys out of office, but on some level, if they're going to get in there and then vote the right way, at least we have them doing the right thing instead of stabbing us.
That's definitely the good outcome. But I would just caution this: what we're not discussing at any great length, and I promise you've watched legislative action enough to know they're already mapping out their response, and we're not calculating fully what that might be. And I think we might be surprised with what they come up with to neutralize us, or at least reduce power. And so back to the point, who acknowledges, who says that the Georgia Republican Party is the representative, or who rightfully owns that brand? I mean, is that even clear? Could they make a claim to the Republican Party? And could we withstand that claim?
I mean, we're the state chapter of the RNC, so I mean, we are the Republican Party.
Could they pull it? They're not particularly friendly to conservatives.
I mean, that would be. I mean, if the Republican Party said that we weren't the Republican Party anymore, that would be wild. I mean, I don't think they could do that legally. I think that would be a big potential fight over it. But I mean, that would really be a wake-up call to, I think, conservatives and Republicans around the nation, if they're like, oh, you want to hold them accountable to a brand and then you don't get to be the party anymore. That would be I don't think that. I mean, they didn't pull Virginia. They haven't pulled Virginia. Yeah. They haven't pulled Utah. So,
yeah. No, just things to think about, because all this, we don't want to be marginalized in our efforts. Attaining this majority that we're just now getting to experience, and then trying to figure out what we do with that capacity. you just don't want to see that squandered, because we didn't think about the one thing they do that would neutralize all this effort. So I'm not sure I'm smart enough to know what that is, but I guarantee they're thinking about it.
Well, hey, I appreciate you, Mike. Appreciate you raising those questions.
No, thanks for letting me chime in. Y'all are doing great work. Keep it up.
Yeah, Mike, you're awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff to be thinking about here. Cassie asks the question, is this something that could be applied in other states?
I mean, I think, yes. I mean, any state party, I think, could institute this. I will say that, I mean, I don't know all the states and their systems perfectly. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I know California, the politicians appoint their delegates, so that could be a pretty negative system there, and they have a different election system there. But yeah, I mean, other states could do this. I mean, Virginia already has a system where their convention can pick nominees and exclude everyone else. So yes, this could go to other states. I would hope that it goes to states where people like, people like the quality of the people at the state GOP conventions are the ones that would be deciding it in other states.
Right. And your point is that it has been applied in other states in different ways already. So we're just doing it this particular way. As to Brant's had his hand up for a few minutes. What's your question, Brant?
Yes. Thank you. My question was with regard to the use of this. If this rule were to pass, there would most likely be a change of calendar in the Republican convention cycle. Wouldn't you think, Alex? Just given the magnitude of so many state races and legislative races that would have to be qualified, wouldn't you consider it likely that the Republican Party through the state committee would adopt a new call for the convention, an amendment to your rule saying that the district conventions shall handle legislative races within their districts and so on, just simply and subsidiary down to the local level, simply because there's just no way for them to mechanically deal with so many races at once? Wouldn't you think it would be more likely for something like that to happen and for the convention cycle to be pushed back, say, a month, so that, for example, the district conventions could meet in early March right before qualifying, and that way they could settle all of that before qualifying began? Wouldn't you think that would be a likely outcome?
I think that could happen. I think it really depends on what the how the state committee wants to do it. I mean, there are advantages to doing the convention after qualifying and after the legislative session, because it does create a nice little hammer there that could come down on bad politicians. By the same token, though, doing it earlier, right before qualifying, does make it so that there is an immediate repercussion that stops politicians from running immediately if they have been acting badly, and it could be a very immediate times. You have to wait a year to potentially do it. So I mean, I think there are advantages to both sides, both ways of doing that, but I think that this rule being implemented is the good first step and a necessary first step to really making that happen. I mean, the delegates' voices need to be heard on this.
Good point.
Follow-up question. I'm sorry, a quick follow-up question, if I may.
Yes.
A follow-up question is, given that the qualification process closes at a certain time, we would need to have completed our disqualifying of any potential candidate before qualifying closed, because we're still using the primary process with the May primary and the July runoff or June runoff. Ergo, we would have to have our final list. People would have to be qualified or disqualified by the end of qualifying in March, hence the calendar being pushed back a little, which also is probably helpful, because I'm sure, Alex, you have people asking you about, well, why should my state representative or senator be subject to the entire state convention as opposed to something a little closer to home? So I think this could probably help answer that question for them, that most likely it would actually be put in the hands of a convention much closer to them.
Yeah, and it all just depends on what wants to be done. I mean, I think it's more difficult to remove someone with getting 800 votes than a smaller number, and that's why I think this is a good first step. But I did notice a comment in the chat that that's relevant to what you just said, Brant, which is that the any sort of disqualification, like saying the state will not qualify someone as a Republican, that is into perpetuity. Somebody asked, like, well, is there a way to, like, for them to come back on, or like, is it really fair that it's a permanent ban? And it's not permanent. It's just until the state convention decides to allow you back, if ever. And I mean, I do think it's one of those things to think about, that these people that are running for office, they are representing Georgians. They're representing all of us, and they are claiming the authority to pass laws on behalf of all of us. So, I mean, if they turn around and do something bad and we don't allow them to qualify as a Republican, I mean, I know this may be sort of sad in a way, but it's like, well, I mean, we have other people that are going to actually stand for our principles, like that we want the best in there. We don't necessarily want to, if someone's in there and they do a bad job, I mean, I sort of feel like they, it's time to them to move on and find another job and let someone else, take the reins. I mean, these are supposed to be servant leaders, not career politicians. Politics, I don't think ever was meant to be a career.
Right. And, getting back to what Mike Crane was saying about, what if they take away some of our power or influence? But if we think about it, I mean, we don't really have a lot of power influence right now. I mean, you could say we have right now zero influence or power or leverage over what happens at the state capitol. They basically tell us, you're just here to help me get reelected. You're basically a slave to help me get reelected. You have no say in what I do whatsoever. You cannot tell me what to do. And so I don't see how we, running the risk of putting this forward, how we potentially lose anything. We have everything to gain. We have nothing to lose, because you can't lose more than zero, which is what we currently have. So James Albee asked a question: would this apply to district attorney races and judicial races?
Though district attorney and judicial are county races. So as is stated in the rule, that this would not affect counties' abilities to choose whether or not to qualify or disqualify candidates. So it would not be applying to it wouldn't be doing anything to the authority of counties.
Aren't a lot of those races nonpartisan too?
I know judicial races are, I think a lot of maybe all the I think district attorney races are partisan, or at least they are in a lot of places.
James, did that answer your question? You have your hands up. Did you want to ask that or something else?
Oh, that's right. He said they're multi-county races. He just said that. Yeah. And those are partisan races. It would depend where they qualify. I think they qualify. Well, if they qualify with a state, then they would be subject to it. Yeah, they would be subject to it if they qualify with a state party, then they would be subject to it. If they qualify with a county, they wouldn't. DA races, I forget. I'm in DeKalb, where we just have one for the county. But yeah,
did that answer your question, James?
If they qualify for the state, they would have to.
Hello?
Are you?
Yes.
Did you still have a follow-up on that or something else?
I do. I unmuted. I'll be brief. This is just the attorney and me. Is there an appeals process? Look, this is a lifetime ban essentially, and like all lawyers, we look to an appeals process. We're going to have conservatives who could be subject to this for whatever reason. And are we going to have an appeals process? And I also will say, I do believe that our judicial races on the state level, the Supreme Court, the Court of, that's a partisan race, isn't it? And I'll shut up and listen.
So I don't think the court races are partisan. I think those are nonpartisan, even on the state Supreme Court level. And I will say the appeals process. So, and as a fellow attorney, I think that this is going to be hopefully well received. Is that the more you have processes, the more that they're going to find ways to potentially litigate and argue and try to find loopholes. And who are the ones that have the most ability to do that? Usually the ones with the money, and essentially the political establishment are the ones that are going to try to push that type of thing. I mean, I will say that the appeals process for a state convention, being that the state convention is, we are the governing authority for the party. We set the rules. We do that. I think that the appeals process there is that you can make a motion to reconsider the day of, and you could show up to the next state convention and make a motion to allow to have the party qualify you in the future. I mean, it's not a ban where it's like you never get to show up or be involved, or that you're banned from the party. It's just you're banned from qualifying for office. So if you make it to the next state convention, or your friends make it to the next state convention, they can move to say, you know, like if I was banned, for example, of ever qualifying as a Republican, I mean, at the next convention, I could go through a delegate process and say, I move to allow myself to qualify again. Or Brandt or Nathaniel could say, I move to allow Alex Johnson to qualify again. And the delegates would get to make the decision. So it's not as if it is truly a lifetime ban. It's just, you got to be able to convince your fellow Republican leaders and activists and people from around the state that you are actually worthy to run for office again. And maybe there'll be redemption stories, maybe there won't. I mean, my ideal outcome is that we never have to disqualify anyone, and everyone actually just starts following the platform, which I know some of us fought very hard, and Brandt did a good job shepherding, getting a platform instituted over the past 2 years.
Yep, absolutely. We have several questions that I've seen come down the pike that relate to our unit of measurement. Like, how would we measure, evaluate whether a candidate ought to be disqualified or not? You'd say the platform, correct?
I would say the platform, sure, that's something to look at, but I would say that every single delegate going to the state convention, like all of us, like, we are Republicans. We pay attention to this. We are independent individual people who, like, I think that we know a Republican when we see them. And I think that to some extent, like, sure, some people aren't going to know the voting records of every candidate, but I mean, we have plenty of groups, plenty of people. I mean, even the critics of this rule, like, you know, I know someone was mentioning that Debbie Dooley was sending out an email and being critical of this, but the whole point is that she lets people know all the time about what politicians are doing and about votes, good votes or bad votes or whatever else. I mean, I do it with my email list. The GRA does it. Like, different groups put this out. Plenty of paid groups put out what's going on. And as I think, and I love the comment in the chat by Mary Barbie saying, quote, "It's an opportunity to exercise our power instead of being victims. We can't avoid that responsibility just because we know they will retaliate." And I think that that really is the crux of it, is that, I mean, the way that this is evaluated is by the state convention delegates. And if good people are involved and engaged and get the information in your county level, in your precinct level, in your districts, I mean, you get to determine if these people are actually Republicans based on what they're doing. And what it will really come down to is, for a motion like this to be successful, you're probably going to have to, like, somebody's going to have done something pretty bad, like pushing a tax increase or trying to kill a bunch of gun rights legislation, or a combination of it over many years. And I think that's what's going to get them out. But that's my personal opinion of what's going to happen, is that some people who have done some really bad stuff are going to be facing the chopping block, and if they don't start acting better. And hopefully we never have to do it, but
right,
you know, we'll see how they act. I mean, they're pretty good at self-preservation, as we all know.
Right. We've received several questions that have basically to do with, well, how could this rule be amended or changed, or how many it might change other things, like Brandt was saying about the calendar. Some people have asked us, well, what if we gave the districts the authority to, the district conventions the authority to vote to qualify or not qualify, you know, congressional district candidates? There's lots of different things that could happen after the rule is adopted, right? We can cross those bridges when we come to them. Right now, we're just talking about initially getting something in place that lets us to have some form of accountability, and we can change other things separately at another junctures.
Yeah, because and that's something about the rule that I want everyone to make sure to understand, is that the way this rule is worded, and I mean, I encourage you to read it, because it's the reason why it's short and we had to have two, one to do this and one to change the oath, is because there's a word limit on rule changes submitted. And the rule change being submitted just codifies that the state convention by majority vote can disqualify people or requalify them. And it also makes it very clear that no group, like, you know, the state committee couldn't turn around and like change this and make it so that, you know, 5 people make the call. Like, this rule just gives power to the delegates. It can only be changed by the delegates. only the delegates get to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't add on additional rules that give that authority or recognize that authority, so to speak, for a district convention or for another body. Like, all of those things can be added, but this just on the very broadest level makes it very clear that the delegates, the biggest body, the most people, get to make that call at a state convention, have the ability to do that. So it really just empowers the delegates, and other ways of doing it, things to add on or change, those things can be done in the future, but in no way would passing this rule like give power to a small group. This gives power to the big group, only the big group, and that's it, to the state convention with all the delegates there. And as someone pointed out in the chat, I think they said that an appeals process that gets around the state convention defeats the purpose of the delegates. It just makes it so a small group could usurp power, which is something I'm very afraid of, because you've seen it happen before in party actions in Georgia. Like, we need the delegates to have the power.
Right. I love Chris Deeb says, nobody ever complied their way out of tyranny. Great quote. Brant's got his hand up again. Go ahead, Brant.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm actually good for the moment. You answered my question a minute ago, so thank you.
Okay, so this question I see in the chat came up the other day when you were in Walker County, and I don't know that the answer got recorded on the video. Somebody says, in the recent cave by McCarthy, MTG, and other Republicans on the debt ceiling vote, if it was considered so major to seriously consider being used against these folks, would that be something that would make us maybe want to think twice about implementing the rule?
And I mean, and here's the thing to remember. So, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, GRA endorsed her unanimously at our last endorsement convention. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like the recent debt ceiling vote. A lot of Georgia politicians voted in a way that I think gave up power and leverage on that vote. But I mean, you have to think about the fact that at a state convention, it would be, I mean, Marjorie's voting record, for example, has been very conservative and very good. Overall. So when you really think about it, like, to convince a majority of state delegates to go against her, like that seems, to me, it seems very far-fetched. But I mean, again, I'm just one vote at the state convention. If everybody else on this call disagrees with me, then, you know, that's fine. But I think that what it comes down to is that this is much more likely to be used against somebody who has a history of voting poorly, because, you know, when all the people in Marjorie's district get up and say, we love Marjorie, we don't want anything to happen to her, I don't think the state convention is going to say, well, we're going to ignore her and vote this other way. That doesn't make sense. And by the way that delegates are allocated, remember, Republican areas have more delegates, and everyone at the convention is a Republican, not some moderate AJC squish. So I think that's really the answer there. I mean, I don't think that the people at a state convention would be trying to, like, we saw who was booed at the last convention versus who got a lot of applause.
Right. And people say a lot of things in a heat of passion when an issue is fresh in their mind. When they've had months to cool off, they may look at it a different way. And people, you know, we'd have a discussion, we would debate, you know, there'd be delegates from all the different parts of the state would, you know, raise points and counterpoints, and they would have to persuade a majority of delegates from across the state to kick somebody off.
And here's the other thing. I'm pretty sure that once this rule passes, you aren't going to have McCarthy trying to push and bully Georgia Republican Congress people to go along with bad votes, because every single one of them is going to respond, hey, if I do that, I might lose my office. So that's the thing to remember, is that we are helping our friends in Congress. Like, we are giving them political cover. That's not something they can publicly admit to. It's not something they can run around saying, like, well, thank you for allowing this, because it doesn't look too good. But I mean, that's what practically happens, is that they can point to us and say, sorry, can't cave ever, because they might throw me out.
Yeah. Chris asks the question, would you be willing to do a straw poll on this call as to the following? who would support this more if it required a 66% majority, a supermajority to ban a candidate?
Hey, I don't know if you, like Nathaniel, I know you're running the Zoom, so if there's an ability to push a poll through whichever account type you have, that's fine. Otherwise, I know that, well, Brand, I think, recently sent out something to all the state delegates asking some questions. I mean, maybe we can have another poll, but I have no opposition to polling this issue. I know that support for the accountability rule has been increasing as more people learn about it. So I'm all for that. I do think we need to allow the hammer wheel to come down. So I like the 50% threshold, but raising it is not something that, you know, I think I'm opposed to having it higher, but I definitely want to hear people's opinions.
Right. So we could do a poll on our email blast sometime. I don't really know how to do it on this forum, but yeah, I think it's a worthy question.
Nathaniel, this is Brant. If you give me if you give me about 60 seconds, I can post one in the chat.
Okay.
Like.
Yeah, go for it. Thanks, Brant. Victoria Cruz, you've been waiting with your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. One of the questions or comments in the media was, in the chat was, would we get media pushback on this? And there
already have.
I know there already is media pushback. I saw something today where the headline was, did you guys see it? Flat Earther, referring to Candace Taylor. This was on Hot Air Express.
Yeah, no, there's several media groups that have claimed that Candace Taylor is a flat earther. She has said repeatedly that she is not. They took that clip out of context.
I know. I don't believe she is, but
right.
But they know that she was GRA endorsed.
Right.
So they know, and they also know that the GRA is pushing this rule. So they kind of made their connections and say, would you want somebody who supports a flat earther to be choosing who can run? So and we're circling this back to this rule, accountability rule, and trying to make it sound like something really dippy. And I was convinced that they had taken that out of context. Candace is not a flat earther. I voted for her. So anyway.
Thank you.
No,
but that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing.
And this is a thing that's so tough, and this is why the delegates are so important. And especially, I mean, most delegates, I think, are somewhat immune to a lot of that sort of liberal media push, which is a good thing. But thinking about it systemically, and I know this is a little philosophical, but you have the media that loves quoting everything the politicians are saying. They like having that access. They like having that connection. The people who make money off this stuff have plenty of connections in the media all the time and are going to be giving tons of quotes about, well, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. But the reason they're saying it's bad is because think about it, it takes away their power. It takes away the power of all this money and the paid political industry in order to select the candidates and to push those candidates to vote for things that betray the Republican brand, but keep their clients in money and in office, and essentially like let them serve their corporate donors and PACs and those interests. It takes away the power from those groups and gives it to the citizens, to the delegates, in order to maintain the Republican brand. And so, yeah, the media has been attacking. They love to actually use specific pictures and specific themes and quotes from people that are, the more tied in with the politicians, and they like framing this that way. But I mean, again, you have to think about who this rule, what does this rule change from a user experience? When Republicans are still going to be showing up to vote in a primary, and they're going to walk in and they'll see Republican options on the ballot. They will pick the best one out of those options from their recollection, which may or may not be the actual best one. And then the general election will come around and they'll be choosing between a Republican who is going to be either marginally better than the Democrat or a ton better than the Democrat. But that will be the user experience. And while I'm sure that the AJC can try to say, oh, this rule is bad, I mean, what are they going to do every convention? Say, oh, look, this poor politician was not allowed to qualify again. Like I don't think they can really turn that into anything horribly impactful. I mean, at worst, they let people know about the convention cycle, then a whole bunch more people that are Republicans show up to the conventions, meet all of us, and then learn like, oh, you all are actually like getting rid of these corrupt people. And then we grow our party's strength through doing that. And I mean, and if people want a case in point, I mean, that's what's been happening with the Georgia Republican Assembly and our membership. I mean, we accept, I will say we do not accept everybody, but we definitely, like, we default to, if you say you agree with our principles, we tend to accept all those applications. That's why we've gone since 2015 from like 5 members to over 1,000. And the idea is when people join, they will meet other people like all of you on this call, and then learn like why our principles, when you enact them, they are the best. So I really think that any attacks will just be in our favor. I mean, more people knowing about the convention process, great. They want to say that we're terrible. Okay, fine. They've been doing that anyway.
Well, I just want to make a comment. I saw a lot of comments in the charts that who listens to media, you know, that kind of stuff. This was conservative media. This was conservative Rhino media. And I don't subscribe to anything else, and I don't watch TV. So this surprised me that there are people in the conservative movement watching what you guys are doing and striking out. I mean, this is not mainstream at all. This is
establishment
alternate media
groups. You mean not conservative? Because yeah, that would be an oxymoron. But I get
no. This is what's Christian Adams, Public Interest Legal Foundation. It's all under the umbrella of his media group.
Okay.
So that surprised me. That's all.
All right.
Yeah, and I think the more people who learn about it, the more they'll like it, because it does lead. It solves a lot of the problems. It solves the money and politics problems. It solves, like, you know, you hear about term limits. It avoids that issue, and it stops us from waiting around for politicians to keep paying lip service to fixing these issues, and we're fixing them ourselves within the party.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of media groups that support the establishment. You just have to be really discriminating and listen to what they say and what they advocate for. And are they trying to hold our Republican officials accountable, or are they trying to insulate them from accountability? If you pay attention, you'll know who's who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. Nick says, you know, as far as procedure goes, I want to try to condense his question a little bit. I think he's asking, like, if you're trying to do one person or a group of people, would this need to be done through a resolution, written? Could it be done orally? What would be the mechanics of making a motion through Robert's Rules of Order and our rules process to disqualify somebody at a convention?
I mean, go up to a microphone and make the motion. Alternatively, I think there are procedures in Robert's Rules about submitting written motions. I mean, there's multiple ways of doing it. I think some of that would probably be fleshed out in the call, but the rule itself requires the ability for delegates to make that motion. So they could use any process available under Robert's Rules or under the call, but there are multiple ways of doing it, and any delegate would be able to do it.
Good. Okay. There was a question the other night at the Walker Town Hall that I think we also didn't get your answer recorded on. Somebody said, well, how is this democratic? Does this fall into the criticism that the media makes about us, where they say that we're not democratic enough? What would your answer be to that?
I mean, and that's the thing, is that the idea of democratic voting is tied to the general election. And you also have to think about the fact that some of those same people are going to get rid of the Electoral College, which would put, you know, all of the votes in the hands of like big liberal cities on the coasts for president. But to specifically answer that, I mean, the Republican Party needs to maintain its brand. The people who benefit from us not maintaining our brand are the big government corporate cronyist interests that have led the country into our current debt situation, the current regulatory state, you know, the current media state. I mean, all of this is due to abdicating authority and power to those groups. So I would say that we live in a republic. we have a political party that stands for principles, and the whole point of what we are doing is we're there to get those principles and policies that are good for the nation into law. Like, we want to be a premium brand. Like, we want to be the Ritz-Carlton of politics. And we aren't going to get that if we keep like following these ideas of like, oh, well, you need to listen to the media because they're going to criticize us for like saying we aren't democratic. I mean, anybody can show up to the conventions that says they're a Republican. I mean, it's not a high bar to be involved in the party. The issue is that the party hasn't been maintaining its brand, and people would rather be spending time, you know, in their careers or their families than going out to an area where the only power they're told they have is to be a cheerleader for politicians that have betrayed principles. I mean, going back to my first few years in politics, I go to party meetings and hear people applauding more spending and bigger government from Republicans. Like, I don't know why we were applauding someone who did that. And to this day, I think that's why we need to maintain our brand.
Right. And we're not the Democratic Party, right? So we are the Republican Party. We've shot to like a system that is more Republican, which is what this is. It's a representative system with checks and balances. And as I think Winston Churchill said, you know, a democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. Thomas Jefferson said in his first inauguration as president in his speech that you have to have safeguards for the minority against the 51%. Otherwise, the 51% can say we vote to take away all your stuff and kill you all. And so that's what Republican systems do, is they provide safeguards to the 49% and a check on the 51%.
Is RLH, do you have your hand up? Like, if RLH has his hand up, I don't know.
Go right ahead. I don't see a hand up, but
no, it's an actual hand. Like, it's a physical hand. That's
I don't see the video. Go right ahead, RLH. Go right ahead, RLH. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, $1 million question. What do you think the odds are, you being in much more experience? I'm a new delegate. I'm a new at this whole thing, precinct captain. What do you think the odds are that this resolution will pass at the convention?
So what I think is that if everyone on this call is you know, enthusiastic about it and gets up to microphones and makes sure to have their voice heard on it, then I think there's a very good chance it'll pass. I think that what it comes down to, though, is that what will likely be a barrier is either one, the time. It may be that the convention drags on long and people all want to leave and they didn't bring enough snacks to stay fed late on Saturday night. I think there's also a chance that they may try to pass convention rules or an agenda that makes it so that this isn't really discussed. I think that that's something that could occur. And I think that ultimately at the very beginning of the convention, right around the time of the adoption of the agenda and the adoption of the convention rules, anybody who wants to see it pass needs to be ready and at microphones and making it very clear that they want to make sure the convention rules are a way that make sure that this rules change is debated and brought to the floor for consideration and debated and ultimately passed. Because I think that that's the greatest threat to its passage is tricks regarding the rules to stop it from even being debated by the body.
Right. Several people say, look, we have an open primary system. I'm looking at the chat box. So this provides a safeguard from the abuse on Democrats running for Republican office. Good point, y'all. Absolutely. Want to make sure we answer all your questions. So if you have a question, don't let us skip you over. Raise your hand.
I did just want to note, Joanna Hildreth did, I think, eventually, she's now on, but just so she knows, there was a shout out earlier to her and the failed attempt for the establishment to take over a county party at the last convention cycle.
Right. Brant, you got your hand up again?
Yes, and 28 people, about half the folks, or about half the people on the survey on the call have voted so far, and the result is how high do you think the threshold should be? And the answer that folks gave was a little over 46%, or to be exact, 13 votes out of 28 for 50%. And for 60%, it was 10 votes, and for 66%, it was 5 votes. So a little under 20% for 66%, and the rest were there. So I guess the question is, to those 5 people who voted for 66%, the 80% of us are okay with 60% or less, but or rather 80% of us are okay with 60%. A little under half are okay with 50. To the 5 who didn't, to the 5 who voted for 2/3, would you join us if we went up to that number?
Right. So, this was a conversation you and I had, Alex, early on when you were drafting this proposal, because I was kind of thinking we would do the state committee would be the body that would decide, and it would be a 2/3. And you made the point that you thought that the state committee could more easily be corrupted when you have 2-year terms and it's only 150 people, whereas the delegation is 1,500 to 3,000 people, and they have to be reelected every year. You want to touch on that again?
Yeah, and that's something that, and I know there are a lot of new delegates on the call, and I hate to be the bearer of sort of cynical news a lot of times, but I want us all to stay involved, but also know what we're fighting against. I mean, it would be trivially easy, I think, for some of these politicians with multi-million-dollar campaign accounts and personal wealth after, selling a few books to bribe 150 people. You could bribe them with jobs, you could bribe them with money, you could give business to their families, and it would be trivially easy to do that with a group as small as the state committee. The thing that is, and I'm not saying this state committee, but a future theoretical one. I have nothing against the people on it. I'm on the current state committee. The issue, though, and you may think, oh, that sounds conspiratorial and sort of out there. Well, think about the RNC. 3 people from every state and territory, so that takes you somewhere over 150, somewhere between 150 and 200 people. And in some states, the RNC representatives don't have term limits. And some of them actually work in politics, or their families work in politics. So when you are sending money to the RNC, and the RNC is talking about raising $500 million or however much money, you have to think which consulting firms, political consulting firms that are making money off these expenditures are somehow tied to RNC members. And why is it that Ronna McDaniel got reelected, even though just about every grassroots Republican in the country was opposed to her? She got reelected overwhelmingly. Well, think about the money, think about the representatives on there, and realize that, it may make it sound more efficient to do it with a smaller group, but that suddenly makes those positions a lot more valuable. And when I say valuable, I'm not meaning valuable as in, just like, oh, it's a nice prestigious thing. I mean, it can make people money. And when you look at the RNC, you have to look no further than the RNC to see how there's a lot of self-interest that could be involved if a small group of people is controlling either a lot of money or a lot of, like the ability to have politicians on or off the ballot, which is why we need it to be the state convention.
Okay, so the question Tim asks, is this coming from committee or from the floor? You've submitted this to the Rules Committee, right?
Yes, and there is a provision in the convention call that required anything to be submitted to the committees in order to be considered by the convention at all. So I submitted the rule to the appropriately. I know that was done correctly. So will the Rules Committee or the Resolutions Committee have this come out to be debated? I don't know. I'm on the Rules Committee. I'll find out if they're willing to have a vote to send it out. If not, then we're going to need a motion from the floor to discharge it from the Rules Committee and to be passed and debated and approved by the convention. And somebody will have to go up the mic and do that. Multiple people should go up to the mic and do that. I would, right along the same lines where I think the delegates have the power, I encourage all of you, if you like this rule or even if you don't like the rule, make sure to go to the microphones and make sure to make a motion to have it debated and discussed. Make sure that when convention rules are being debated, that you get up and have your voice heard, that you want rules changes that allow it to be heard and not ones that limit your power, because I mean, it's your convention, you're the ones with the power, and that's why we're all there as delegates, is to have our voice heard, not just to be a cog in the machine or a cover for you know, politicians are acting poorly. I mean, it's our responsibility to keep a good brand. Otherwise, we're facilitating lying to the voters.
Okay. So we've got a few people who think that we ought to make it more than just a simple majority on the chat. So that's something we might want to consider. You're saying that it's going to be in the Rules Committee. It could be debated from the floor if the Rules Committee does not allow it to be issued under their approval.
As long as there isn't a convention rule limiting that ability, because what you would do is it would be a motion to discharge the accountability rule from the committees.
And I believe I heard that the Rules Committee is going to allow folks to speak to this rule proposal at the Rules Committee meeting on Friday. Is that correct?
I have not heard that yet. I mean, I haven't checked my email in a few hours, so that may have come out, but I don't recall seeing that.
Okay, I'm sure you'll obviously represent it well on the committee since you're a member there. So
yeah, but that's the other thing is these committees are not how can I put this? Like they're made up of people just like you. So ultimately, what comes out of a committee or not, that's all just determined by a group of people who are appointed. So I mean, if you want something to be heard, I mean, you make a motion to make sure it's heard.
Right. All right. Any other questions, folks? This has been a great interaction. Lots of good thoughts put forward. Alex has done a great job answering your questions, your concerns, hopefully familiarizing everybody more with the process.
Yeah, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate everybody's interest. I mean, no matter what side of it you're on, I mean, obviously, I think this is a way to solve money, solve term limits, solve a lot of issues, and really maintain our brand and make sure we have a good top Class A brand. But I mean, even if you're opposed to it, I mean, I appreciate you being here and stating your concerns. And I hope that everyone is going to tell their friends and their county parties and get on microphones of the state convention and make sure that this passes.
Well, thank you, Alex. You've done a lot you've given a lot to make this build some traction and to provide us with an opportunity to pick your brain. It's been almost 2 hours we've been on the call, so I hope we haven't worn you out. But we're grateful for you. We're grateful for you showing the leadership to get this idea rolling. Whether it passes now or later, it's definitely we need to be moving in this direction for greater accountability. So really appreciate you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Nathaniel.
Thank you for everybody that's on the call. We look forward to seeing you on Friday and Saturday at the convention. God bless you. Please be safe as you're driving down to Columbus or up to Columbus. And we look forward to having a great time improving our Republican Party with you on this coming weekend. God bless. We'll see you. Till next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.